My name is Jonathan Jackson. I'm 60 years of age. This story happened when I was 49. I had built a fortune beyond my wildest dreams: software companies, tech startups, penthouses, luxury cars, private jet, and everything a billionaire could want. But no amount of money prepared me for what I witnessed that autumn afternoon. Have you ever had your world completely flipped by someone you least expected? I worked for hours crafting this story just for you, so if you enjoy it, please consider subscribing. It means the world to me. By that time, my daughter Angelina was 7. My late wife had passed giving birth to her, and I raised her with every advantage money could provide: private schools, private tutors, designer clothes, the works. I thought I was giving her the best life possible. But somehow, in giving her everything, I had taught her the wrong lesson: that her worth came from what she owned, not who she was. Angelina had grown entitled. She treated our staff with contempt, looked down on classmates who didn't have private tutors, and frequently made other children cry with cutting remarks. Teachers warned me repeatedly, but my busy schedule meant that most of her upbringing had fallen to nannies and staff who, while well-meaning, rarely enforced boundaries. I had wealth, influence, and power, but I was failing at the most important thing: raising a kind, compassionate human being. I started to worry. What would happen when she grew up? Would she remain brilliant yet cruel, measuring everyone by status and possessions? I realized I had to intervene before it was too late. Have you ever felt like you gave everything to someone, only to realize you hadn't given them the right things? That afternoon, I left work early, a rare thing, to pick Angelina up myself. Usually, our driver handled it. But after yet another teacher report about her behavior, I wanted to see her for myself. As I approached the school, I saw Angelina standing by the iron fence, but she wasn't alone. A girl about her age, thin, dirty, in clothes several sizes too big, was standing next to her. Her shoes were falling apart, hair tangled, and her entire presence spoke of hardship. My first instinct was to dismiss her, but what she was doing stopped me cold. She was teaching Angelina math. Angelina, usually dismissive, was listening intently. "See, if you move the X to this side, then you solve it here," the girl explained, gesturing excitedly. Angelina's face lit up as understanding clicked. Can you imagine a 7-year-old billionaire's daughter learning algebra from a homeless child? What would your reaction be if you saw this? I stayed hidden, observing. The girl, Jessica, as I would later learn, was patient, gentle, and animated. Angelina asked questions, repeated steps, and genuinely listened. For once, my daughter wasn't showing arrogance or entitlement. She was respectful, eager, and grateful. I watched as this young girl, who had nothing, was giving my daughter something she had never learned in her elite school: patience, generosity, and the joy of learning together. This girl didn't have tutors or luxury books, yet she was teaching with precision and heart. I couldn't look away. Have you ever witnessed generosity from someone who had nothing? What would you do in a situation like this? At that moment, I realized something. The lessons Angelina needed most weren't in any textbook or curriculum. They were here, in this girl's humility and brilliance. But how could I bridge the gap between their worlds? I had the money, the influence, but what about my own biases? How would I approach a child like Jessica without frightening her? I couldn't move. I just watched from a few feet away, hidden behind a hedge, as my daughter listened to Jessica, the homeless girl, explaining math. Angelina, who usually dismissed others with a wave or a scoff, was hanging on every word. Have you ever seen someone so eager to learn that nothing else seemed to matter? I want you to imagine this for a second, a child with everything, and a child with almost nothing, connected over numbers and curiosity. Could generosity and knowledge truly bridge worlds? Angelina had always been bright, but in her elite private school, her brilliance was clouded by arrogance. Tutors tried to teach her, but none could break through the walls her privilege had built. She had every tool imaginable, expensive manipulatives, apps, advanced textbooks, but none of them seemed to make her grasp algebra. Jessica, on the other hand, had none of these advantages. She scavenged what she could, an old notebook, a pen missing ink, scraps of paper, but she had determination and brilliance in abundance. Watching her teach, I realized that education isn't measured by money, it's measured by curiosity, patience, and the willingness to share. What would you do if you saw a child giving her all, teaching someone who had everything yet knew so little about gratitude? Then came the moment that made my heart stop. Angelina leaned forward and said, "Can you show me another problem?" Jessica smiled, her teeth showing a gap where her childhood braces probably never were. She flipped through the notebook, gesturing carefully, explaining fractions, then algebraic concepts with patience that any teacher would envy. "You see, if you move the y here, it balances this side," Jessica said, pointing with her small finger. Angelina's eyes widened. "Oh, that's so much easier than what Mr. Johnson explained." I was struck speechless. Here was a girl who had slept in shelters, begged for food, and scavenged notebooks from trash cans, teaching my daughter concepts my tutors couldn't convey. And Angelina, my daughter, was humbled. She didn't scoff or complain. She listened. She learned. Have you ever witnessed someone teaching from pure kindness, with nothing to gain? How would you feel in that moment? I decided to linger, watching every gesture. Angelina asked questions, innocent, curious, free from entitlement. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jessica," the girl replied softly. "Jessica Miller." Angelina tilted her head. "Where do you go to school?" Jessica's smile faltered. "I don't. Not anymore. We had to leave our apartment, and I can't afford to go anywhere now." Angelina frowned. "But how do you learn?" "I watch through windows," Jessica said. "Sometimes I see the teachers writing on the chalkboards. I remember everything I can. And I practice in this notebook." She held it up proudly, though it was torn and worn. I couldn't believe it. A child standing outside a school, learning by watching, teaching my daughter algebra, while so many in her situation would give up entirely. My daughter, usually impatient, was completely engaged. She said, "That's not fair. You should go to school." Jessica shrugged. "Maybe someday. But for now, this is what I have. I love learning, and I love sharing it. That's enough for me." I felt a lump in my throat. She had nothing, yet she gave everything. And my daughter, so used to getting everything without effort, was learning the most important lesson of all, respect and humility. Have you ever met someone who gave so much while having almost nothing? What would you have done if you were Angelina? I realized I had to act, but how? Could I approach this child without frightening her? How would I introduce myself without imposing wealth or privilege, which might scare her away? I stayed hidden, heart pounding. Angelina said, "You're really smart, Jessica. I wish I could learn like this every day." Jessica smiled, then added softly, "I just do what I can." Something inside me shifted. My wealth, my penthouse, my cars, they meant nothing compared to the lessons unfolding in that small, dirty notebook on a school fence. Can you imagine standing there, realizing that someone with almost nothing was teaching your privileged child more than you ever could? What would you do in that moment? When I finally stepped closer, hidden behind the fence, I saw something extraordinary. My daughter, usually spoiled and dismissive, was laughing with Jessica, the homeless girl who had nothing but her brilliance. Have you ever witnessed someone so pure in their generosity that it completely humbled you? I had to stay calm. I wasn't sure how to introduce myself or if Jessica would even trust me. But one thing was already clear: this encounter was going to change everything. I reflected on how Angelina had grown up. Every toy, every class, every private lesson, everything had been bought. And yet, she lacked patience, empathy, and humility. Jessica, a child who had slept in shelters, scavenged notebooks, and wandered streets for knowledge, possessed all of these qualities naturally. It struck me how often society misses true talent. Jessica's potential wasn't visible to most, but there it was, sharp, kind, and generous. Meanwhile, Angelina had the world but needed to learn what truly matters in life. Watching them together, I felt a pang of regret. I had focused on building wealth and left my daughter to learn character from anyone but me. What would you do if you realized that someone with nothing had more to teach your child than anyone you paid? Angelina asked questions eagerly. How did you learn this? She inquired. Jessica shrugged. I watch and remember. I practice in this notebook I found. I can't go to school right now, but I still learn. And I love helping others learn too. Angelina's expression softened. I wish I could be like you. You're really smart and kind. That moment struck me. My daughter had never spoken to anyone like that before. Usually, she judged, dismissed, or ignored. And yet here she was, expressing admiration for a child with nothing. I stayed silent, watching. Could it be that this encounter was already reshaping her values? Jessica continued, patiently explaining algebra steps, pointing to fractions and excess on the page. See here. If you subtract this, you get the answer. Angelina followed along carefully, her eyebrows furrowed in concentration. I realized something profound. The most valuable lessons are rarely found in money or privilege. They are found in character, generosity, and resilience. And Jessica had all of these in abundance. I couldn't help but wonder, have you ever met someone whose character alone changed the way you see the world? What would you do if you were in my shoes, witnessing this for the first time? As I observed, I began questioning my own priorities. Wealth had given me everything except true understanding. My daughter had everything but the most essential lesson, that people's worth is not measured by what they have, but by their actions, empathy, and intellect. Jessica was teaching Angelina algebra, but she was teaching me something far more important. Human potential can exist anywhere, regardless of circumstances. The thought overwhelmed me. Here I was, a man who had spent decades building an empire, realizing that a 9-year-old homeless girl could teach lessons no amount of money could buy. I felt guilt, awe, and inspiration all at once. What would you do if someone completely upended your assumptions about wealth, education, and human value? How would you act if the world handed you a moment to change a child's life, and maybe your own, forever? The sun was starting to dip low, and I knew I had a decision to make. Could I approach Jessica without frightening her? Could I step into her world without imposing my privilege? And most importantly, could I ensure that Angelina would continue learning these lessons beyond today? Angelina turned to Jessica. My dad could help you go to school, she said. Jessica laughed softly, shaking her head. I appreciate it, but schools like this cost a lot. Thousands of dollars. Even if we weren't homeless, we couldn't afford it. I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about education, it was about opportunity, dignity, and recognizing talent when no one else saw it. I realized that my actions in the next few minutes could change not just Jessina's life, but Angelina's, and perhaps my own perspective forever. Have you ever faced a moment where your choice could alter the course of someone's life? What would you do if you were standing on that fence, witnessing brilliance and kindness unfold in front of you? I knew I couldn't just stand there anymore. Watching Jessica teach my daughter had already changed my perspective, but now, a decision had to be made. Could I step forward without frightening her? Could I offer help without turning it into charity or a lesson in privilege? For years, I had built a world of wealth, influence, and comfort. Yet here I was, realizing that the greatest lessons weren't in my penthouse or boardrooms, they were unfolding on a small patch of concrete outside a school fence. Angelina, who had everything, was learning from Jessica, who had almost nothing. But Jessica's brilliance, patience, and generosity shone brighter than any material possession I had ever owned. I felt both admiration and a pang of guilt. I had been wealthy beyond measure, yet I had failed to see potential where it mattered most. I realized that inaction would be a choice to perpetuate inequality. And so I began to consider what I could offer: housing, education, and opportunity, but without taking away Jessica's dignity or agency. Have you ever faced a choice where your privilege could help someone without patronizing them? What would you do? I walked up to the fence slowly, keeping my distance to avoid alarming Jessica. "Hello," I said gently. "I'm Angelina's father." Jessica instinctively stepped back, fear in her eyes. She had learned to distrust adults in suits. Most ignored her, some yelled at her for existing in their neighborhoods. "It's okay," I continued, kneeling to be at her eye level. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." Angelina looked up at me with a mixture of pride and hope. "Daddy, this is Jessica. She's teaching me math." Jessica's mother, Brittany, soon appeared, weary and exhausted from the day's struggles. I introduced myself, listened as Brittany explained their situation: homelessness, financial struggles, lack of opportunity, and I realized that my wealth could provide more than temporary relief. It could create a bridge to a stable, meaningful life. I made a proposal. Jessica would enroll in Angelina's school. Brittany would receive temporary housing and a job at my charitable foundation. This was not charity, I emphasized. It was an investment in potential, in talent, in character. Brittany looked stunned. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Because your daughter has intelligence, patience, and generosity. And Jessica has shown Angelina, and me, lessons money can't buy. That deserves recognition and support." Angelina beamed. "See, Daddy, I told you she was amazing." Can you imagine standing there, realizing your choices could give someone a life they never thought possible? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? As we drove to the library, Angelina and Jessica chatted non-stop about math, science, and books. I watched in the rearview mirror, struck by how different my daughter's demeanor had become. She wasn't condescending. She was attentive, respectful, and kind. I reflected on what I had just witnessed: a child with nothing teaching a child with everything, and both changing each other. My own assumptions about privilege, intelligence, and wealth were being rewritten in real time. Brittany, initially guarded, began to open up as we discussed her skills and how she could help in my foundation. I offered her the position of operations manager, a role that would allow her to rebuild independence while providing for Jessica. It was more than a job. It was a chance to restore dignity and create opportunity. I realized the lesson extended far beyond Jessica and Angelina. True kindness is a choice, one that often requires courage, humility, and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone. It's not about giving money, it's about recognizing potential, nurturing it, and removing barriers that prevent it from flourishing. Have you ever made a decision that could change someone's life forever? How did it feel? That day marked the beginning of a transformation for all of us. Jessica began attending school, Brittany started work. In my foundation, and Angelina began to understand that wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in empathy, generosity, and integrity. But the story doesn't end here. Over the coming months, lives would change in ways I never could have predicted. Lessons about kindness, potential, and the human spirit would ripple far beyond that small schoolyard fence. Have you ever witnessed a small act of courage or generosity that changed multiple lives? What would you do if you had the opportunity to do the same? It's been 11 years since that autumn afternoon outside Angelina's school. Looking back, I realize that the small moment when I saw Jessica teaching my daughter changed not just her life, but ours as well. From that day forward, our lives were intertwined in ways I never could have foreseen. Jessica enrolled in Angelina's school and thrived. Within months, her natural brilliance and dedication made her a standout student. She didn't just catch up, she excelled, rising to the top of her class, mastering math and science with a love for learning that was infectious. Angelina, meanwhile, was transformed by her friendship with Jessica. She began to understand humility, empathy, and the true meaning of kindness. Brittany, Jessica's mother, started working in my charitable foundation as operations manager. Her first-hand experience with hardship allowed her to design programs that helped families escape homelessness and rebuild their lives. Over the years, she moved from operations to director of programs, impacting hundreds of families. Together, Jessica and Angelina became inseparable. Jessica's resilience and intelligence inspired Angelina to volunteer, tutor, and advocate for underserved children. What once was a spoiled child who measured everyone by possessions became a compassionate young woman who used her privilege to make a difference. As for me, the experience reshaped my understanding of wealth, success, and human connection. I had built empires, amassed fortunes, and created a life many dream of, but the richest lessons came from a child with nothing. Jessica's generosity, patience, and love of learning reminded me that true value isn't in money, it's in character, empathy, and what we give to others. I watched my daughter grow, learning not from tutors or luxury, but from the example of a child who had endured unimaginable hardship yet gave freely. Angelina's transformation was profound. She became compassionate, thoughtful, and purpose-driven, choosing to mentor other children and volunteer at shelters. Jessica's journey also reminded me that opportunity can change everything. By offering her access to education and support, I witnessed not just a child reaching her potential, but a family reclaiming dignity and independence. Brittany, who once felt trapped by circumstance, now leads programs that help countless others achieve stability. The most important lesson I learned that day, and continue to carry with me, is that acts of kindness and recognition of potential can ripple far beyond what we imagine. Jessica taught my daughter, and me, that wealth and privilege don't define worth. Character, generosity, and courage do. Sometimes the person with nothing has the most to give. Sometimes the teacher appears in the most unexpected form. By choosing to act, to recognize talent, and to provide opportunity, we can transform lives in ways that ripple for generations. So, if this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences with acts of kindness. Have you ever been inspired by someone who gave everything while having almost nothing? How did it change you? Stories like this remind us that the world is full of unexpected teachers and quiet heroes. I spent hours crafting this story just for you, to remind us all that even small choices can have extraordinary impacts. If this story inspired you, please subscribe. It helps me continue sharing tales of courage, kindness, and human potential. And remember, you never know whose life you might change by simply seeing their potential.